It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The most hotly anticipated diplomatic summit in decades begins on Friday in Alaska, where I'm told it isn't snow and ice, but perfectly lovely at this time of year. Though whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Russia depends on which Donald Trump, which day you were listening to. The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is saying absolutely nothing. Donald Trump, on the other hand, can't stop talking, running off at the mouth on every hotline, telephone line, and in front of every camera. The only good news being that he seldom says the same thing twice, and usually completely contradicts the statement he made before. And like a peculiar game of whack-a-mole, just as one war might well be coming to an end, multiple other wars are poking their head out and screaming for attention. We'll be covering them all here tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Not since Rocky Marciano fought Don Cockell, the horizontal chump, has there been a mismatch, diplomatically speaking, like the one that's shaping up, limbering up, getting its shape together in Anchorage, Alaska. It's Donald Trump and Marcorubio versus Vladimir Putin and the legendary, absolute kingpin of diplomacy, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. If it were down to the negotiating skills, the diplomatic finesse of one side, it would be a no contest, just like Marciano versus Don Cockell. But it's more complicated than that. The art of the deal is said to be Donald Trump's strongest suit, Well, we'll see about that. The current evidence of it is not so great for the great charmer. The dogs barking off at the heels of Donald Trump, of course, are intended to circumscribe the room for maneuver that he might have in any negotiations. So we'll soon see whether he's a man or a mouse. Is he cowed by Mark Rutte and Fred Merz and Macron and Keir Starmer? Who is he listening to? Is he listening to the needs of the American economy, the American people, the geopolitical and military realities on the ground in Ukraine? Or is he listening to these dogs barking? We'll soon see. The truth is that Zelensky is going weak at the knees. As a matter of fact, I saw him trembling so on a piece of footage just the other minute, whether it was chemically induced or whether it was mere stress and anxiety at the fact that a foreign president is negotiating on his behalf in a talk that is destined to decide the whole future of his country, and he's not important enough to be there. Of course, as Donald Trump rightly said in the Oval Office just a few months ago, he doesn't have any cards. He's gambling with World War III, and he's a little dictator whose mandate has run out. So there's every justification for refusing to allow Zelensky a place at the iceberg that is the Alaska talks. But the call today with European Union leaders was sufficiently filled with portentous threats and defiance that Trump felt the need to again insult and threaten Russia. Now, I don't know Mr. Lavrov well. I don't know Mr. Putin well, though I have met both of them several times now. They never struck me as the type of people who need, first of all, to run off at the mouth at every student TV camera, or, for that matter, as people easily intimidated. Because the facts of the matter are clear enough. The Russian armed forces are advancing across the front at pace. 110 square miles of Ukraine has been taken by the advancing Russian forces just in the last 2 days. That's a lot of territory. And the encirclement of Pokrovsk looks almost certain to be completed, if not by Friday, then definitely by the weekend, meaning another hugely significant military defeat for the armed forces of Ukraine, who, despite fighting bravely for all this time, are now clearly in a state of disarray. Their morale is so poor that thousands are deserting and walking across to the Russian lines. The replacements are having to be seized with ever more extreme violence from the streets and prized from the arms of their mothers, wives, and sweethearts as they're bundled into a van, given a rifle, and sent to the front line where their life expectancy is sometimes measured in hours rather than days. The internal squabbling in the Ukrainian regime is reaching fever pitch. The Vogue magazine has already told us who the American choice for Zelensky's replacement is, and it seems overwhelmingly likely that whoever is making the phone calls to Donald Trump from now on, it will not be Volodymyr Zelensky. He will leave with black bin bags stuffed with cash, although he's already transferred a very great deal of your money, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, in Europe and in North America. He's already transferred untold millions, maybe billions, of the money that your taxes gave him, but he'll no doubt want some ready cash in a black bin bag or 200 or 300 on his way out of the door. That's if he's lucky. If he's unlucky, he'll go the way of the Diem brothers in South Vietnam, set up by the American security services for assassination. We must hope that he is spared that ending. But definitely, like the Mare Celeste, he will forever float around the world of no particular importance to anyone except for the money he's got to spend. The European Union, which has bankrupted itself in support of Zelensky and which has committed itself to unending, eternal economic, financial subvention of whatever rump state emerges from these talks or from the outcome on the battlefield, is unable to pay the bills that it is writing checks for. A good example is the so-called doubling of the defense expenditure of every NATO country. Of course, that always looked a tall order. The struggle to get to half that number has caused untold social, political, and economic problems in all Western European countries. But it turns out they've got clever accountants. They are going to spend money on roads and bridges and railways in their own countries and count that as their 5% contribution to the NATO budget. Whether Trump will be happy about that, whether the American taxpayer, who already shoulders 80% of the burden of the expenditure of NATO, and yet seems to have very little control, at least of the rhetoric of NATO leaders, remains to be seen. That rhetoric is reaching fever pitch. In London, in Paris, in Berlin, and in Brussels, the chorus is clear that President Trump has no right to negotiate about Ukraine over the head of the Ukrainian spent government. Well, that's a very strange proposition. If NATO is funded 80% by the United States, and if the Ukrainian military marches on its stomach in boots, uniforms, rifles, and wielding weapons, and being transported in motorized transport with American materiel, who else can negotiate an end to this conflict but Donald Trump? Now, Chay Bowes, who will be on the show later, has already opined speculatively, as he is the first to admit, as to what the Russian demands will be. And I have no reason to second guess him. He's in Moscow. I am not. But I do say this, that for all the blood and treasure and diplomatic disruption and the threats still of the mass confiscation of hundreds of billions of dollars and euros worth of Russia's sovereign wealth being held by thieves who threaten to cash it in, I'm not sure that the gains delineated by Chay Bowes would necessarily have been worth the blood and the bones of all the grenadiers that lay in the ground in Ukraine in order to obtain it. If the final settlement is merely the freezing of the conflict, like the Korean conflict, with a huge demilitarized zone and with a never-ending stream of NATO weapons, and Rutte made plain this very week that NATO will continue to supply weapons to rump Ukraine, whatever is decided by Trump and Putin this weekend, then that will not have been worth the price that Russia has paid for it. If Odessa, the jewel in the Russian crown of Russian civilization, remains in the hands of the Azov battalion, the Hitlerites and Banderites, the killers of Jews and Slavs and Poles in huge numbers, if that is the outcome, and if the outcome is the continuation of the marooning of the Russian populations in Transnistria, in Moldova, and along the coast, then I myself, if my son had been sacrificed in that war, I myself would not have regarded that as a price worth paying. Of course, the Donbass cannot be underestimated as a prize. These are Russian territories. They were always Russian territories. They were only ever Ukrainian territories as long as Ukraine was a part of the USSR. When the USSR was disbanded, all these Russian territories should have come back to Russia. Crimea being the case in point. Crimea was not given to Ukraine until I was already at primary school, and it was given after a drunken night of toasts by the drunkard Nikita Khrushchev as some kind of fraternal gesture, when Crimea, of course, is of the utmost significance, strategically, militarily, socially, culturally, and in national and ethnic terms to Russia, that it could not possibly have been the intention that it would end up in a foreign country which bore ill will and malice towards the country whose territory it really was. So we'll see about the art of the deal on Friday. In the next couple of minutes, because we've got 3 guests, great guests, and I want to give them the maximum time, so I'm cutting my own monologue short. In this peculiar game of whack-a-mole, we may very well just see the end of the Ukraine war as a new war in the Levant begins, as a continuation of the previous war in West Asia, in Iran, in the Persian Gulf, begins again. Netanyahu gets full marks from me for honesty. He said in an interview yesterday he dreams of greater Israel, which might have come as a shock to the rulers in Egypt, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, which is where the borders of greater Israel lie, but probably didn't, because they've known it all along. They've just chosen to remain in denial. But the outcome of the Western-imposed diktat and ultimatum in the Lebanon may well prove the spark of all-out war in the Middle East. Peace in Ukraine, war in the Middle East. What an advance that would be. It's all coming up here tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Here's the poll for tonight. Will the Trump-Putin-Alaska summit end the war in Ukraine? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel. Do subscribe to it, please. It might be the last redoubt. It's t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. If you are watching on the YouTube stream, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. to give the show the thumbs up and to tell all of your contacts that we are broadcasting live at the highest level on YouTube, on TikTok, and on Facebook, and on Rumble, and on virtually all platforms. An extraordinary thing is happening on our Facebook portal, where we were once so severely restricted that barely hundreds out of my nearly 1 million followers on Facebook were ever watching our clips. But in the last 2 weeks, 2 clips alone have garnered 1.7 million views. So if you are watching on Facebook, we are very glad that you are now again being allowed to do so. So if you want to call the show, it's toll free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in Britain and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Sharmine Narwani is the oracle for me of events in the broader Middle East and indeed farther afield. She's a columnist at the Cradle, although that only tells half the story. Good a story though it is. Sharmine Narwani, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Been a while since we saw you on here. Very glad to have you back. I called it whack-a-mole earlier. The whole world is fixated on whether the Ukraine war is going to come to an end, perhaps very, very soon. But the danger of a new Middle East war has suddenly loomed into an almost certainty. The events in Lebanon and the open statement being made by Netanyahu that his greater Israel dream he intends to achieve, and that they're not finished with Iran, and that a new war, perhaps by the end of August, certainly by December, can be expected. What's going on here?
You know, I always like to say on the Cradle's podcast, and this is a repeated refrain by me, is that Netanyahu and the Israeli establishment, the extremist wing Israeli establishment, has to be kinetic at all times. Otherwise, his government collapses. Otherwise, Netanyahu's trials, for corruption, etc., continue. Otherwise, Netanyahu's coalition government falls apart. So I think the thing to watch is simply this. The Israelis have to be kinetic. And this is something we're seeing by the Americans as well. You know, they're not acting like victors. They're not acting like the ones who are sitting in the driving seat. They're racing so far ahead and so quickly, almost to create an illusion of victory and everything, going their way. If they were in fact in the driving seat, they wouldn't have to, put out statements and trying to get media headlines every single day. So the answer to this is Netanyahu has to be kinetic. The U.S., again, failing empire, has to be kinetic. If they stop, everything collapses. I see it as a very, very weak position, to be honest. Yes, for Netanyahu's government, coalition government, war with Iran, war with Lebanon, the continued occupation of Syria, the, finishing the genocide and the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, those things must continue. But his limits don't stop there. There's Iraq, there's Yemen, there's Somaliland, the Horn of Africa, where so many global players are moving into, controlling the new corridors, the new sea routes, the new passageways for transportation that is going to define the geoeconomics that is going to define this century for the global community.
Yes, the rhetoric is one thing, though, and we always have to keep reminding ourselves that Israel is composed of fewer than 9 million people. It's composed at the moment of less people than it has been for a very considerable time, certainly since the fall of the Soviet Union, because so many Israelis have fled. I can tell you that for sure, because everywhere I go, they're turning up as tourists or as exiles in unprecedented numbers. Some of them are pretending to open Moroccan restaurants, even though if you look at their website, it's clear they're Israeli websites. The Israelis who can are voting with their feet out of the country. They have a 10,000 soldier deficit for the declared, although now truncated, mission in Gaza, merely to reconquer Gaza City rather than to occupy the whole of Gaza. Their soldiers are not turning up for their reserve duty. Thousands of them are wounded or sick. A very large number of them have been killed. And the bitterness inside Israeli society is reaching fever pitch, as these demonstrations every Saturday night make clear. So is this just not all big talk by Netanyahu? Can he really walk the walk?
You know, this is it. I mean, the ones who are talking big on the global stage are, I think, the ones who are really worried about their position. You're actually right, George. You know, Israel has been hemorrhaging its military capabilities since the beginning, basically October 7th, 2023. I think the late Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, pointed out a few months later that Israel would be out of arms entirely by now if it wasn't for, you know, multiple US and Western European shipments of weapons every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. I agree with you wholeheartedly that the Israeli army, in terms of manpower, is really struggling. This is a country of 9 million people at best. As you said, many who have either left, immigrated, meaning permanently, or have stayed out for the duration because they have that option. They have a second passport for the duration of conflict. But worse yet, they cannot get the Orthodox Jewish community, the Haredim. There's a big civil conflict in Israel over the conscription of Orthodox Jews there, the Haredim. So they can't get that there. They have a massive number, more than anything, of Israeli soldiers who are being treated for PTSD. They expect that bill for treating these soldiers over the coming years to be in the billions and billions of dollars. So the army chief, the chief of staff of the Israeli occupation forces, Zamir, has said, and screamed at Netanyahu in recent cabinet meetings that we cannot do this. We cannot go in and occupy Gaza. The Israelis got out of Gaza in 2005 for a reason. They could not maintain that occupation. And yet this is still the same government with depleted forces, manpower, and a pariah image globally, thinks that they can secure their positions, their occupation of Syria, they can secure their positions in southern Lebanon. They can keep attacking Yemen. They can do this in Gaza. And by the way, the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank is only just starting as well. I have to say, just remind our viewers of something that the founding head of state of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, always spoke that this country, this colonial state of his, could only sustain short, hard wars. That a long war, would collapse Israel. And this has been a military doctrine that has been there since the founding of the state. Never, ever have they gone into a protracted war. And this time, they're breaking with every single one of their military doctrines, their principles. And I'm telling you, and I think Israelis realize this full well, that Netanyahu has to keep kinetic, otherwise his coalition falls. But with his current activities and the way he's going forward, he's going to pull down the entire state of Israel, not just his coalition, in my view.
Mussolini used to go around the world threatening people with Hitler's army. Essentially, Netanyahu is threatening people with America's army. I mean, when he says, as he did yesterday, that there's hundreds of kilograms of highly enriched uranium still at large in Iran, and that they are going to take it out, he knows that Iran is more than capable of handling Israel. So that whole boast is as a precondition, requiring American kinetic involvement. At the same time, they say they weren't happy with Trump's level of commitment during the 12-day war. And they may even have had to use the Epstein card in order to get him to be as committed as he was. So is this just braggadocio, or are they really going to start a war with Iran before the end of the year?
I mean, there are many Iran observers and, supporters of the Iranian government who would like to see that war happen. I have to be honest, George. We know that Iran, in its first Operation True Promise and its second one, and even its third one, the 12-day war, as we call it now, Iran didn't go the whole way. Iran continued to do what it has been forever, exercising strategic patience and bringing the temperature incrementally to message to the enemy, okay, do you want us to go here? Do you want us to go there? In the end, Iran, for the first time, used a hypersonic missile in battle. So that was when everything stopped. When the Israelis went racing to the Americans and said, okay, we need to stop this right now. The next time, Iranians I'm listening to are saying that the next time the Iranians will start with that level of messaging, right? I mean, actually, they'll go past messaging the most point. I don't think Israel, a sliver of a state, has the chance of survival if all of its security, military, intelligence, operational infrastructure is hit. And that's something they can do, the Iranians can do in one day with a single barrage of missiles. With 100 missiles, you can take out Israel's military targets. And then with another 100, you can take out all of its critical infrastructure, desalination plants, its gas fields, et cetera. We're talking about, a very tiny piece of geography that has zero geographic depth compared to Iran, that is a massive country with, a lot of geographic depth and a lot of terrain that armies can never cross, So it is a lot of bravado, but I fear that in their heads, okay, in the bubble that Netanyahu lives in and even Trump lives in, and it really is a bubble, that they may go ahead. And that's a danger for the whole world, but I always caution our viewers at the Cradle that Trump has only been, it's not even 8 months, right, that he's been president. He has a good 3+ years to go. The man has an attention span issue. He doesn't actually have a lot of depth. He doesn't go into the weeds on issues. What are his principal goals is, to win, to look good, to make money. And there are many ways to craft this, but war is not one of them. Wars in which the U.S. is just basically handing out billions of dollars a day is not the solution for Trump. So now, after all the threats he lobbed against the Russians and Vladimir Putin, et cetera, in the last, 2 months or so, suddenly there's a discussion. The Americans, Trump spoke to Putin for 2 hours. He made it sound like, okay, I get it. Instead of Putin crying uncle, in effect, it was Trump. They're going to meet. Everyone's going to try to spoil that meeting. To be honest, and we're talking about West Asia, but I think a lot of people in this region are looking at what's going to happen in Alaska in 2 days to see, because, as usual, people living in frantic times think frantically and worry, for instance, that, okay, maybe Putin will exchange a valuable geopolitical card in order to get the war in Ukraine to stop. And what could that card be? Could it be over Armenia or Azerbaijan? Could it be over Iran? Do you know what I mean? It's It's sort of like relationships in this region. Could it be over oil prices? Will Putin give something away? But I personally think Putin is in the victor's seat right now. I mean, he's going to go he has gone from strength to strength in Ukraine. He's continuing to show that and will do until the very last minute in Alaska. And, I don't think that there's much he has to give. The Russians have always, I think, never veered from their agenda for peace. Okay. They've never changed their basic principles, their foundational, asks. And I think, Trump will have to give. But everyone's watching these talks because West Asia, being the geographic bridge between Europe and Asia, where so many competitions are taking place economically and politically, is always everyone's mailbox. It's where the messages are sent to each other, between great powers. It's unfortunate, but I think this is a very important meeting for the region. I do think that if, Viktor Orban, the Hungarian prime minister, said it perfectly, we've been reading about how Zelensky's been calling everyone in Europe to see, can I get in there? I want to meet with Trump. I have something to say. Can you twist his arm? He's just not invited to Alaska. And Orban said, if you're not at the negotiating table, then you're on the menu. And this is what Zelensky fears more than anything. But for us, watching this happen in Ukraine is very interesting, because if Zelensky's an easy sideline, okay, does the deal with the Russians and Europe just has to suck it up, okay, or go to war themselves, then couldn't that happen with Netanyahu, who is definitely becoming a thorn in the side of the Americans? He just asks and asks and asks, and then tries to push. Trump has already experienced this within 6-7 months of being president. Tried to be dragged into a war with Iran. And the Israelis realized Trump really meant it when he said, I'm one and done, and so I think seeing Zelensky sidelined for the White House to go in directly with its adversaries and sort of strike a deal and put an end to a war essentially will have great ramifications in this region. Netanyahu could be next. I think U.S. allies will also be, put on guard, that they can't sort of stretch their list of demands too much. There's a lot happening, George, as well as I do, and you really do. The situation globally is so fluid right now. There's almost no way to predict anything.
We're not going to go out of business anytime soon, Sharmine. Those of us who are involved in analysing it all, and there's nobody analyses it better than you. Thanks very much for being with us on the mother of all talk shows once again. Let me take a quick break and then some calls before Professor Wolff. You don't want to miss him, I promise you. Stay tuned.
What a great show this is! I listened to it, I thought, wow, what a great show. I've called into your show today, George, because I'm a great caller. Probably the greatest caller you've ever had. I really am. The only way your show could be better is if it had more of me, Donald J. Trump, in it. You keep talking about me, George. You do. I've heard it, I have. So many of the American people, the best people, listen to your show. And I've heard them crying about me. I have, and I listen and I go, ooh, America, don't cry. Don't cry. You need to be careful what you say about me, George. You don't want me to put a tariff on your show like I did with China. And then you'll come running for my help, just like little Zelensky. I know you will. I know these things. Make the mother of all talk shows great again. That's why we're here. That's what we're gonna do, George. We're gonna boost your ratings. Donald is gonna boost them bigly. I'm giving your show the Trump bump. You're welcome, George. Thank me. And remember, nobody talks like me. Nobody calls like me. And absolutely nobody ends a phone call like me. I'm hanging up now. Not because I finished, but because I won.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, that was one Donald. This is another one. Donald in Copenhagen on Trump and Putin. Donald, what would you like to say?
Well, hi, George. What would I like to say? Well, I hope I can keep myself relevant because of my blood pressure, which goes up when considering that they're insulting my intelligence, in particular with these characterizations that they're, holding Putin as the enemy. He's going to be successful in keeping NATO off of his border. And the other thing, what is the American interest in Ukraine? And I believe that it is the purchase by Monsanto and Bayer of the swath of Ukraine that was sold to them the size of Italy. That's the American interest, and that's where they want to divide the possession of that country. And Zelensky, of course, he will go like they are. They'll throw him under the bus. Now, in regards to the Gaza situation, to say it lightly, this is an extermination of some people. But I think if I was to say that this was a crime to exterminate a breed of people, which seems to be organized, but to characterize Israel as an organized crime would be politically inelegant, we should say it in that way. And the thing is that this calling the thing, it would be like me saying that the Palestinians are committing assisted suicides in droves or something like that. That's a nonsense characterization. The same as if I were to say that the Nuremberg trials were an overreaction to Hitler's inappropriate behavior. It is ridiculous how these things are characterized, particularly in the people's minds of who's right and who's wrong and who's on the best side of history. And I hope that Putin just refuses to cooperate with anything with the United States in regards to relenting or giving anything back to the United States. They're the terrorists. So are the Israelis. They're terrorists, and defining these people that are protesting in England as terrorists. This is absolutely insult to the intelligence of anybody in the right-thinking human being.
It is. But we have to face something, Donald. You are an exception in Copenhagen, and me and Gayatri are exceptions where we live. I never watch or listen to mainstream news or read it. I reach over in the car and I turn the news off when it comes on the radio. But today, for some reason, I heard the global newsroom hourly news bulletin. And it was as different a perspective as you and I could possibly imagine. And the parallel universe that we are living in, admittedly, more and more of our society is finding its news and its analysis in places like this, the mother of all talk shows and other similar events. But the great majority still of our fellow citizens are getting their news and analysis from their national equivalent of the global newsroom, which is a Zionist-owned corporation, and they've got a local radio station, London Broadcasting Corporation, LBC. We were on Classic FM, and they take their news from that local radio station. And, I mean, for them, black is white. War is peace. They are the masters of doublespeak and distortion, such that it is laughable. I laughed out loud at their characterization of the summit coming up in Alaska, but then I wasn't laughing because I realized that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who listened to that news bulletin, but did not know what you, Donald, in Copenhagen, and I, and the other people watching this, know. And that's a measure of how far we've yet to travel. Donald, thanks. Now, look, you can make comments on YouTube if you scan the QR code now. leave your comment on the YouTube stream, and I'll try and read them out. As I do this one from Jolly Lollipop 1, who sends $5. Thank you very much. If I had $1 for every time Netanyahu told the truth, I'd still be broke. Thanks. Ramplins says, I just heard big Israeli delegations are going back and forth to make a deal with the authorities in South Sudan, where 11 million people have been displaced, for a deal to transfer all Palestinians. Well, I've got no doubt that they would like to do that, but how you get all the Palestinians onto a non-existent train, cattle truck, line to take them to South Sudan is, of course, another matter. Papa Yims says if Bibi goes for Iran this time, Iran will not stop halfway this time around. Israel should be careful with Iran. And Uzi 1mm says a $100 million nappy bill. Israel's economy is finished. And Nat also says not sure about one and done when Mossad is dangling the pictures over Orange Man's head. Let's go to Jordan, where Khalil has something to say on Egypt-Palestine. Go ahead, Khalil.
Hi, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, good. Thank you. What would you like to say, Khalil?
I have a few points I would like to say. I don't know if I have the opportunity or the time, but I'll try to be as concise as possible. So the first point was about Egypt. I don't know if you can expand on some of the tensions that are happening between Egypt and the Zionist entity. And, well, as we know, the leader over there is supposed to be their ally or working for them, but the tensions have not been reported properly in the media, and the tensions are very high, especially with the things that are relating to the Nile River and the Nahda Dam. So if you have the time to elaborate on that, that would be appreciated. My second point, if I may, I just wanted to say that regarding what's happening in the Muslim world in general, there's some kind of demonization of the Sunni people. I know that the resistance in Gaza is Sunni, but somehow, recent events are painting the majority of the Sunni Muslim as not with the cause. But I just want to highlight to everyone, many Sunnis in Jordan and a lot of other places are with the resistance everywhere in all the sects. So just want to make that point out there. And the last point is that...
Khalil, and I'm perfectly sure that that is true. There is a trend within Muslim society which is sectarian, fanatic, and which cares more about the particularities of difference between them and other Muslims than they do about the liberation of Palestine. That's plain, that's clear. But and it's not small, that current, but it is not the common or garden feeling of the great majority of Muslims in the world. I know that because some of that current have done their best to make Muslims hate me, for example, because I oppose sectarian division while they seek always to foment it. And they, I can tell you, have completely failed to achieve that, as any conversation I have in any part of this kingdom with any Muslim would make clear to you. So I've got no doubt that you are speaking the truth, that the vast majority of Muslims know that sectarianism is a deliberate ploy to divide them and weaken them for the empowerment and enrichment of others. That much is clear. Khalil in Jordan, thank you very much. Now you can get yourself on the wall of fame tonight by donating just £1 or $1 or €1. You can support us on MOATS.tv website. Just like Andrew Young, Motaz Salah, James Brogan, Isabella Macardo, and Marina Siderias. Please do become a MOATS donor tonight, like these splendid people whose names I've just read out. Well, we've been to Copenhagen. Let's go to Jamaica, where Robert wants to talk about Greater Israel. Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, George, and keep up the great work. George, you mentioned Netanyahu's dream of Greater Israel, which you said he mentioned earlier today. And I don't think the world focuses enough on that, because that shows you the length and breadth of this problem. Right now it's focused on the Palestinians. Now, if you consider that Greater Israel includes part of Lebanon, parts of Syria, Egypt, all of Jordan, emphasize that, parts of Saudi Arabia and parts of Iraq. Now, it's been 70-odd years since Israel has been independent, but as you know, the driving of Palestinians from their land began much before that by the gangs that the Zionists had formed. So you can call, maybe it's 80-odd, maybe 90 years since this project has started specifically with the Palestinians. And they still have not completed the routing and genocide of the Palestinians, although in the last 2 years they've made tremendous strides. But just figure, if they allow this crazy, mad, cultish dream of Zionism to continue for Greater Israel, that they're going to have to take parts of Lebanon, Syria, parts of Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and get Iraq. They are condemning this world to more crazy people like Netanyahu, and to what? Another 500-600 years of this barbarity and inhumanity? If the world does not wake up now, we are doomed to centuries of inhumanity and destruction. And if I could just leave you with one little thing.
No, I've got to press on, Robert, but I was just about to say, if we get a better call tonight, we'll be very lucky. That kind of professorial analysis from across the ocean is a remarkable thing. That was Robert in Jamaica, spelling out what the consequences of Netanyahu's dream of Greater Israel are. It means endless war. Now, you might well say, Robert, they don't have the soldiers to carry it out, but neither did the British in conquering all of India. It's simple. We had a 1 million-man army. Although they weren't even the army of the British state, they were the army of the East India Company, a private company. 1 million-man army, but almost all of them were sepoys. Almost all of them were Indian mercenaries who were working for the white English officer class. It's easy to imagine Arab countries where sepoys would not be hard to recruit. Robert, thanks for that. It's been a huge week for the MOATS podcast. We're in the top 10 in Italy and Colombia this week. Imagine that. That's Italian-speaking and Spanish-speaking audiences. We are in the top 10 in Italy and Colombia. Top 20 in Lithuania, Bulgaria, and Gayatri's hometown of Indonesia. Somebody, when they commented on the Turkey debate we had the other night, that she had Chinese roots. But actually, she is 100% Indonesian. But for some people, all Asians look alike. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. You can also listen to the weekly podcast via moats.tv. After all, you're going there sometime tonight, aren't you, to leave your dollar, your euro, your pound as the price of this great program here this evening. Let's go to Florida You may think I'm touring the sunniest spots in the world, but it's pretty sunny everywhere right now, except Australia. Eve is in Florida on Russia. Go ahead, Eve.
Thank you for having me on your show. The most important is I would like to wish you a happy birthday, if I cannot
Thank you.
Wish you on Saturday. And
thank you.
What I want to say is that Orban says that Russia is very good at winning war militarily, and this is very true. They have the best army in the world. But unfortunately, their record of winning war diplomatically and with the treaty is not very good. And I want to give example, and I would like to give one advice to the Russian. The one example, very famous, is the Versailles Treaty, where because of the revolution, but they lost 2 million men, 3 times as many as the British, and they were not at the Versailles Treaty. The second huge example is 1945, the World War II. No treaty was written between Russia, America, and Germany, and this confusion with many different little treaties here and there led to the fact that the West could reunify Germany within NATO, and that was a huge blunder of the Russians in 1945 and in 1990. And the advice I have for the Russian is be careful with the de jure, de facto thing. De facto means nothing. And they have to remember the expansion of NATO. Expansion of NATO, they say, well, we won't expand NATO. That was a de facto thing. NATO was not there, so they won't expand. And then they expanded, and then they say, oh, but we didn't write anything. So they have to be very careful to trade. Whatever they trade, they have to trade it de jure. And if they have to invade 8 oblasts to give 4 back and to keep the 4 they want de jure, this is a good deal. If they say, well, everything is de facto, it is a bad deal. This is what I wanted to say, is you have to win the war at the treaties level, not just militarily.
Well, you've said it very powerfully. No one could have said it more powerfully. And of course, everything you said is correct. As I say, I don't know Putin well, though I know him a lot better than most British politicians and journalists know him. And he's not the sort of man who is likely to make the kind of mistakes that Gorbachev made in 1990. I'm going to restrain myself from saying what I would like to say about the idiot Gorbachev, the clown, the Pizza Hut advert guy, whose blunders we are living with until today. Putin's not the sort of man to make those blunders, and any mistakes that he does make will be quickly picked up by the world's greatest foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. So I have confidence in the Russian side in this negotiation in Alaska. Thanks, Eve. Siggy25 says, Trump will no doubt call it the big, beautiful summit. That's true. Mouse SF says, Trump isn't fit to be Putin's court jester. And Neil White says, I don't agree with Galloway's politics, but at least he tells it the way it is. The USA will drag the world into the abyss. And Keith Feller says, maybe Trump can make a deal with Putin and sell Alaska back to Russia. We need the money. It is funny that Trump said not once, but twice on 2 separate occasions that he was meeting Putin on Friday in Russia. And Richard Odist says, George, would you ever one day handle the Gaza of the Caribbean, Haiti? Yeah, we did in the past cover Haiti a lot. I must say the audience was not overwhelmingly interested in it, judged by the numbers. But of course, we always stand ready to handle developments in Haiti and anywhere else in the world. But it's difficult when you've got World War III beckoning in Europe, in the Gulf, and the genocide in Gaza. It's difficult to segue to other conflicts. But thanks, Richard. Your point is well made and taken. There's a legend on the line. She is Donna in Panama. Oh, Donna, it's always a delight to see your name up there on the screen. Go ahead.
Wednesdays and Sundays are the highlights of my week, every week.
Thank you.
Okay, what I wanted to say is if, let's say that we had a president and Mr. President or Madam President went to his or her staff and said, look, I think that, we have gone above and beyond for Israel all these decades. And it's really, what has it done for us? What have we gotten? We've gotten the whole most of the world against us because of it. And I don't see that really there's any benefit. I have two questions. One, what do you think that his staff would say to him about the proposal of just cutting ties? I mean, not hurting Israel, just turning off the spigot of money and weapons to Israel, number one, declaring neutrality in the Middle East, and number two, if we were to do that, what do you think would happen in the world, and would it be a horrible, horrible thing for the United States?
It would be the best thing for the United States and the world that I can possibly imagine. It would bring to a shuddering halt the Zionist-Israeli juggernaut that has dragged your country in particular into war after war after war. Not since Eisenhower in 1956 has any president meaningfully said no to Israel. And when Eisenhower in 1956 did say no, and more than no, he said no and get back to your barracks and end this invasion of Egypt immediately, it did bring to a shuddering halt that juggernaut, and it changed the world. It ended French and British imperial pretensions with a terrific blow. Israel, on the other hand, recovered its poise. I put it this way, Donna, just the other day. Not many people have actually viewed it, whether it's been suppressed or whether it's just not that interesting, or whether I didn't put it well enough. But this is what I said. Only cash or compromise or both can possibly explain the massive expenditure of political capital being made by Western leaders for Israel. Think of that statement carefully, break it down. There is no good reason, none, that would justify all of this expenditure of political capital that you described to defend a shitty little country of 9 million people, thousands of miles away on the Mediterranean, that doesn't even like us, that spits, as Tucker Carlson found out to his horror. I could have told him that 40 years ago. That spits literally in the faces of Christian pilgrims on the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem. That has nothing but contempt for Jesus himself. They say he's boiling in a pit of his own excrement. They say that Our Lady, Maria, was nothing but a common prostitute. Why would you go the extra 1,000,000 miles for A shitty little country like that. Give me a good reason. Give me any reason. There is none. And I've been in this for a very long time. The only possible explanation is cash or compromat or both. Donna in Panama, look forward to seeing you soon. I've got to take a quick break because right after this break is the master, Professor Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics, founder of Democracy at Work. And boy, is he a blue chip guest. Stay tuned and you can find out. I don't believe that the mainland European countries give a toss about Britain, and I'm certain that the United States would not sacrifice itself for Britain. That's why I say Britain is completely marginalized. As for the Trident missiles, of course, if the United States, which has dual control over these missiles, gave permission for them to be launched, of course, they would incinerate Russian cities. But what good would that do us? Because we'd all be dead, including the people that fired the missiles. You feel me?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
He's the master step in time, the maestro. He is the doyen of American professors by a distance. Professor Richard Wolff, far too long, Professor, since we saw you last, but what an auspicious occasion. On the brink of the Alaska summit. How do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think I agree with the people that you've been polling that you show across the screen that I'm watching here. I don't think it'll end the war. I don't see anything that has happened over the last year or two that changes the impasse that seems to exist. And if I had to say why, I would have to point to Europe, which is so desperate, at least the way it looks to us from here, so desperate to hold on to the situation, however grim it becomes each day in the Ukraine, that the United States simply hesitates to walk away, which is what the overwhelming majority of Americans, whether they're Trumpers or not, it's clearly what they want. The polls show it. Street talk shows it. Nobody wants this war to continue except our military procurement people, and there's simply not enough to overcome the horror that people feel about this endless war, which they've never understood in terms of an American objective, pouring all that money and all those weapons into this endless hole that seems to be nothing but a losing army. However slowly it loses, the loss is clear.
It's a paradox, though, isn't it? 1 minute, Donald Trump is posing as the alpha male, beating his chest, an aging Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan of the jungle, threatening Denmark with taking its territory and so on. The next minute, he's letting them browbeat him on the telephone on the brink of the summit. Who's in charge? Trump or the Chihuahuas?
Look, I think you've put your finger on it, George. Mr. Trump is trying to stay in power. He has, by his own admission, he was the right man at the right moment to be able to weld together a very heterogeneous coalition. And let me take a moment to explain it. His first obligation is to take care of the largest corporations and the richest people in this country. No one should ever forget that. The single most important act achieved by the Congress with his signature was the 2017 tax cut, which gave the biggest tax cut in our history to corporations and the rich. And I want to remind everyone, 2017 was the end of a 30-year period when massive redistribution of wealth and income took it from the bottom and the middle and handed it to the top. Never did the corporations and the rich need a tax cut less than when Mr. Trump gave it to them. But it had one hook in it. The only thing the poor Democratic Party, limp and lame as it is, was able to get. And that is that law passed in the December of 2017 would expire at the last day of December this year, 2025. Mr. Trump said to the rich and the corporations, give me enough money to win the election, and I will make sure that deadline goes away. There'll be no return to what the taxes were before 2017. And he got that. That's what he got a few weeks ago. The so-called big, beautiful bill takes away the deadline of December 31st, 2025, and adds new tax cuts on top of it. So they're happy with him. Do they like many of his other policies? They don't care. They care for what they got him in there for. He's delivered on that. So now he can turn one day the tariffs up, next day the tariffs down, be angry at this government one day, mollify another government the next day. I spent a few weeks recently in Montreal, Canada. Well, if there once was an alliance between these two countries, it's gone. The upset of the Canadian people was palpable in daily conversations with a taxi driver or a waitress in a restaurant or anywhere else you went. Once you drew people out, they made it clear the deep sense of betrayal that they feel about this strange orange-headed man who gets on the television and says one outrageous thing after another. But the people who run this society, they don't really care. The war lasts another 6 months. The Israelis do something horrible in Gaza. It for them, that's a secondary measure. Mr. Trump delivers what they need and what they want, and they're not going to push him out until that changes.
Well, I mean, that was a masterful summary of Trump's personality and his relationship to the plutocracy in your democracy, no doubt. But on Friday, he'll be sitting down. He thinks he's the master of the art of the deal. Personally, if I were betting on a couple of poker players, I'd put my money on Putin and Lavrov, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I mean, Mr. Trump, look, you have to give him, or at least I think so, you have to give him the credit. He is a theatrical person. He puts on a show. You know, he gets dressed, he has his red tie, he performs what America so badly wants, a large part of it. And what that is, if I could take a moment, and it's very much in line with what has been a theme of the British society as well. The American empire is now over. It's been dying for at least 15 or 20 years. Now, you are way ahead of us. You've had to live through the decline of your empire for a much longer time. So we are fresh into it. So we're at the early stage, which psychologists call denial. We want our leaders to not tell us what we know, what we feel, what we see all around us. We want the theater. Now, we'll outgrow it. I don't know how soon, but we will outgrow it. I can tell from my own students in the university, they know their own futures are so cloudy. The promise of a job, which they grew up with, is not there anymore, and they know it. It is a remarkable bifurcation of people's consciousness here in America. The government and the economy is strong, and we're powerful, and we will smite the world with our tariffs and our sanctions. And it's a theater. That it doesn't work doesn't matter. It's the theater of it all that is what people that support Trump, that's what they want. The rest of the society, which is more than half of it, looks on in horror. They don't want to face the declining empire either. Look at the Democratic Party. You know, we just had that election for president back in November. That's half a year ago. We had three candidates, Biden, Harris, and Trump. Not a word of them said anything about an empire that was declining. It was a non-reality whose context was a population that is learning it each day. We were defeated in Vietnam. We were defeated in Afghanistan. We were defeated in Iraq. And we're in the process of being defeated in Ukraine. Hello? At what point does this begin to sink in? That's the only question left for us as the denial becomes harder and harder to sustain. Look at his actions yesterday. He created a police state in Washington, D.C. He took away all democratic rights, imposed the federal police, excuse me, under his direction, will now control the streets of Washington. I mean, these are wonderful, dramatic acts. He said it's because of crime. His own FBI statistics indicate that crime is down in Washington, D.C. Violent crime is at the lowest level in 30 years. Those are not my numbers. Those are the official government numbers. It makes no difference. The reality is irrelevant. The theater is the thing. If I were better at Shakespeare, I'd quote Hamlet.
Kabuki theatre, not Shakespearean, I fear. But finally, Professor, the whole theatre performance is going to come to a crashing end on Friday if no result emerges. What's Trump going to say? More importantly, what's he going to do if Putin simply will not bend the knee to Zelensky's gang?
Well, my guess is he will do what he has done every other time this has happened. And that's now quite a few times since Russia entered Ukraine in February of 2022. And that is, he will perform an act of bravado. Which one? I'm sure he has a list that have been prepared by his advisors of what theatric to perform. Number two, he will blame Putin. And number three, he'll blame Zelensky. And then we'll go back and have several more weeks and months in which occasional remarks are made. And then another meeting will be set up. And we'll go through all this again with one possible caveat. If the war comes to an end on the battlefield, that is, the Ukrainian military collapse and the Russians, simply move into what's left of Ukraine, that would be a big enough change that you might see an alternative story. But all he does is theater. It's an endless theatric. He had moved the police into Los Angeles a couple of months ago. Now it's Washington. He has told the winner of the Democratic primary for mayor in New York, who normally goes on to be the mayor, that he may not allow him to take office, even though he won by a big majority. Why? He's a young man, he is a socialist, and he's a Muslim. For Mr. Trump, he has to perform the negation of all of that. And so he will simply throw away all pretense of elections, voting, and none of that. We're seeing a man who feels he's on a mission, and that mission is to create a new United States that conforms to some image he has of a golden age. He takes care of business first, and then he takes the coalition he's constructed, fundamentalist Christians, white supremacists, people who love their guns, people who hate immigrants. He's brought that together, and for the moment, he can govern. But he is on a very, very slim edge here. And one major mistake, for example, being caught doing with Mr. Jeffrey Epstein what everyone believes he did, that will be the end.
As Bob Dylan says, you have to pay to get out of going through all this twice. Professor Richard Wolff, the master, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let me take a quick break because we've got another master coming right up. It's Chay Bowes, the master political commentator. Stay tuned. He's a schoolyard bully, Piers Morgan, and he does have a big show, but then he has a big and plush and very well appointed studio, and he has a big and very well paid staff. He has a very big budget. He's an extremely wealthy man, and the combination of all of that does give you a certain head start. We, on the other hand, are a mom and pop business. There's just me and Gayatri. And the people who told me the phones are melting are my own grandchildren who are answering the phones for nothing. This is an unpaid gig I'm doing and do twice a week. Nobody pays me one brass farthing to make this show, to present this show. I'm not sure that Piers Morgan would tell you how much he makes.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, I took my eye off that poll for a minute. Professor Wolff drew my attention back to it. Will the Trump-Putin-Alaska summit end the war in Ukraine? 25,000 of you have voted. You've got 20 minutes still in which to vote. But overwhelmingly, people say no, it will not end the war in Ukraine. Now, just before Chay Bowes, let's take a call. Frida in Cornwall in England on Syria. Go ahead, Frida.
Hi, George. Thank you for your hard work in keeping the Palestinian flag flying in our subconscious for all these years. Thank you. I'm going to have to tell you that I disagree with you on Syria. I find it's actually quite rude that you do not refer to al-Shara by his correct name and you continue to use his sort of guerrilla nickname. From what I know, we haven't really explored the Syrian civil war in my time along with the show, but I do feel like we've glossed over a lot of facts of the persecution and subjugation of the Sunni majority Muslim population in Syria, of which al-Shara is, and the brutality of Sinai prison. And I have to call out Professor Morandi for Iran's crimes and the Lebanese resistance in backing a foul dictatorship in Assad for 14 years, which caused destruction on Syria, as you know. So al-Shara, an average kind of Syrian guy, yeah, he got wrapped up in Al-Qaeda, went to Iraq, did some bad stuff. he learnt his lessons. Yes, he came back to Syria to liberate his country from the failed dictatorship of Assad. Syria falls to pieces. Yes, many things go wrong, but since we've had him in power, there has been peace, more peace, not complete peace. There have been an awful lot of happy Syrians, He did a marvellous job rebuilding Idlib with Turkey, and I reject this notion that he's a Zionist agent. He is a Syrian, he is a Levantist. His last group, Hayat Tahrir Shah al-Sham, Assembly of Levant Martyrs. He's a Syrian. He's a similar DNA as the Palestinians. He has to play a dark horse game. We know that the massacre between the Druze and the Bedouins a few weeks ago was instigated by the Druze, who have been manipulated and encouraged by Israel because they want to eke more into Syria. They want more Syrian territory. They've taken extra from the Golan Heights. Certainly you're going to get a lot of sectarian violence in Syria, but it's a lot calmer. Everybody hates everybody else in Syria. It's a deeply wounded place. And I object to your narrative where you play along with the Iranian line that he's a Zionist agent, and I wanted to push back.
Well, push back you have. I'm going to park the temptation, I'll be perfectly honest with you, to regard this call as a spoof call, a wind-up, because frankly I never heard such a parade of non sequiturs and such a parade of half-truths in my entire life. So it would have been a really good spoof if spoof it was. I'm also going to park the instinct to just leave your call hanging there and let the audience decide on the merits of your arguments. It turns out my main crime in your lexicon is to call what you say is the president of Syria. Of course, nobody has chosen him, nobody has voted for him, because I call him Jolani rather than Ashara. I'm not sure what's in a name, Frida, rose by any other name, but he was calling himself Jolani until a couple of months ago. So I don't want to get into a Turkey-Turkiya debate. Ashara or Jolani, you can call him what you will, and you can view him as you will. I'm only, given the hour and the need to go to our next guest, I'm only going to deal with one salient point that you missed out. Hamas, the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, whom you hold in such high esteem and regard, evidently, lived under the Assad regime in Damascus for well over a decade. I know that. I met them there. Hamas ate at the table of the Syrian regime of al-Assad. And I mean literally. I mean the food that they ate came from this Syrian regime you now excoriate so. Hamas was based in that Syria of which you speak. Their military base, their political base, their leaders, their weapons, their materiel, their money, everything that the Palestinian resistance had, they had from that Syria. So perhaps you should address your concerns to them rather than to me, because I actually don't have a dog in this fight. The happy Syrians that you describe can be easily contrasted with anyone with fingers to tap into Google or YouTube or multiple other platforms to see the reality of Syria. Anyone with fingers can see the obvious disruption to the Palestinian resistance caused by the decision of Ashara that he has only two enemies. And moreover, those two enemies are also Israel's two enemies, Hezbollah and Iran. That's pretty convenient, Frida. It's pretty convenient that Ashara and Israel have the same two enemies. But you cannot deny that the flow of weapons to the Palestinian resistance, which all comes from Iran that you hate so, all of it, every last bullet of it comes from Iran. It doesn't come from any of the Arab countries alongside. You know that. You're an intelligent woman. Intelligent enough to have made that spoof call. In any case, let's go to Chay Bowes in Moscow for some masterful political commentary on the eve of the Alaska summit. Well, Chay, I prayed in aid earlier your speculation, and you were very clear it was speculation, about what the Russian negotiating positions are likely to be on Friday. Have you had any cause to reconsider any of the positions you took a week or so ago now? What's your up-to-date thinking of what Putin and Lavrov expect from this summit in Alaska?
Well, George, good evening to you. And regarding your last caller, I suggest you go and visit the Famine air base in Latakia, Russian air base, of which I've met men who've served there, where literally hundreds and hundreds of civilians sought refuge, and many are still there, running from this Mr. al-Jalani's liberal democracy. Of course, it seems the West doesn't need anybody elected, including Mr. Zelensky, but this Mr. Jalani, 20 years ago, his friends massacred people on the streets of London also, so let's not forget about that. So, sorry, but I just wanted to drop that in. Regarding Russia,
sure.
I don't think anything has changed. I think the reality here has been set in stone, basically, since the night that Vladimir Putin addressed the Russian nation here and set out the goals of the military operation. There was a very rapidly, there was a peace deal. The Russians pulled out of the hinterland of Kiev and pulled back. Of course, they were convinced then by Mr. Johnson not to stop fighting, and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have died in the intervening years. So the Russian position is very much set in stone. People say, what will the Russians want? It's very clear. Russia has adopted into the Russian constitution these regions, the new regions, or which were at once a period in the Russian Empire, Malorossiya. They were Russian before. They're returning to Russia. They have administrations. Crimea, of course, this old chestnut of Crimea, which was signed over to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1954 by Nikita Khrushchev, whose wife just so happened to be a Ukrainian, and he was a Ukrainophile. All this convenient history about what could the Russians possibly want. Vladimir Putin, if nothing else, has been absolutely straight down the line about what Russia's aims are in Ukraine. It's a very serious business for them. And they take their constitution and laws very, very seriously here. There is no mystery. They will want a Ukraine which is essentially a post-First World War Germany, with a reduced military, with the rights of the Russian-speaking population respected, with anti-Russian laws rescinded, with the 4 oblasts recognized as Russian territory, Crimea recognized internationally, and all of it rubber-stamped by the United Nations. I don't think Mr. Putin and Mr. Lavrov, who, remember, when you look at, as you were saying, who would you bet on in the poker game? Sergei Lavrov is, who I've met a couple of times, is a exceptionally experienced diplomat. 50 years in diplomacy. Started his diplomatic career in the East Indies. Like an incredible guy. Speaks Sinhalese. He knows what he needs to do, and he knows what the Russian people expect him to do. So, if you remember, just before this whole event was arranged and announced, President Putin said, look, disappointment comes from a real problem with expectation. People shouldn't expect too much. And I wouldn't expect anything but the Russians to reaffirm what they have said 1,000 times again and again and again regarding Ukraine. And you've got to remember, it's the Russians and Russian people and ethnic Russians who suffered so much at the hands of this Banderite regime, which attacked the people of eastern Ukraine in 2014, which attacked them, assaulted them, burned them alive in the Union Hall in Crimea. You've got to understand, this is a very serious business for the Russians. And it seems to me that if the Russians don't get what they want from Alaska, they will continue to do what they're doing very well and very rapidly on the battlefield. And that seems to be the position here.
Well, I was going to make that point. It's an odd thing, really, to have peace talks with a party that is rapidly advancing. 110 square kilometers in the last 2 days. The imminent encirclement of one of the most significant towns east of the river that is still in the hands of the Kiev regime, Pokrovsk. The wind is in the sails of the Russians, so why stop? Why talk about stopping? That's a question that many people will be asking.
Well, why stop? Well, several reasons. Of course, no war of this scale. And remember, many people in the West have no remote concept, and including in NATO, of the scale of this conflict. The front line, if you include the Russian border, which has to be policed, patrolled, watched, defended, is over 1,000 kilometers long. NATO has never fought a war on a 1,000-kilometer long front line. The mass of men and material and equipment that's needed to fund and defend that border and prosecute hundreds of separate small front attacks, which the Russians have been doing for 2 years now. There's a cost to that. There's a cost in men, in material. There's a cost to the economy. Now, while Russia's economy on paper may be growing, there's also pressures in an economy which hasn't become a true wartime economy, as in the Second World War, for example. They haven't completely retooled the economy in Russia, and they haven't declared war on Ukraine. Remember, less than 10% of Russian GDP has been spent on defense at the moment. Can you imagine that? A very small number of Russia's military capabilities are deployed in Ukraine, essentially. Russia could tomorrow mobilize 5-6 million men and swallow up Ukraine very rapidly. But there's a social cost to that here in Russia, which, despite what you read in The Guardian and in The Independent, the Daily Mail, is not an authoritarian country. People here would say, well, we don't want that, or we may want it. It depends on what the posture is, of course, of the West. So there is an economic cost to Russia. Russia is, as I discussed with my colleague and friend, Brian McDonald, another great Irish journalist, that Russia is kind of right now where America was later on into the Iraq war. But Russia has now been cut off from borrowing on the open financial markets. So it had to be very ingenuitive and ingenious about how it's kept the economy buoyant. And Vladimir Putin wants to continue that. And he wants to continue generating inward investment into Russia. So the vaccination of Russia from external pressure has been achieved in many ways in manufacturing new markets opened up with China. When it comes to borrowing money and keeping the inflation rate down, which is coming down actually in Russia, and the economy is growing, it's still preferential that before Russia runs into any sort of a recession territory, which many economies would do in this case, and Russia hasn't yet, they want to consider whether or not the Americans, and there's only one game in town, remember, the Americans are serious about getting their dogs in a line and saying, we're going to end it on this basis. But on the basis of what I'm saying, and I put my neck on the line with this, the Russians have told us 100 times, they're hiding in plain sight, what they want in Ukraine. And I don't see how politically they can reverse too far away from that, George.
Well, the $64,000 question, as we used to call it, when that was rather more money than it is today, is this. The yapping dogs back in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, London, with Zelensky on their Zoom call, they are attempting to ensure, maybe even to browbeat Donald Trump into not agreeing a settlement, which would, even at a push, be hard to describe as Russia's minimal terms. I mean, to play devil's advocate, Chay, they can accept the de facto annexation of these oblasts, the 4 of them, but not de jure, not recognize them. They can freeze the conflict. But behind their part of the DMZ would be a rump nationalist Ukrainian state that NATO has already made clear they would continue to arm, to pump up, to create provocation after provocation, and that would be the worst possible outcome for Russians, because the sons of those who fought this war would have to fight the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very much, the Russians are acutely aware of that. I mean, in no reality are the Russians going to allow the maintenance and growth, if you like, of the same threats, the fundamental issues that caused the Russian High Command and President Putin to say, we're going over the border in 2022. It's absolutely pointless and settling, given the idea that the Russians have momentum on the battlefield. You got to also look at the wider geostrategic map right now, with America and President Trump throwing tariffs around. Monday, it's 50%. Tuesday, it's 8%. Wednesday, your best friends. Thursday. The Chinese and the Russians think very slowly and carefully about what they do, what they say, how they behave. And they're the complete antithesis of this Trump administration. But anybody who thinks that the Russians and the Chinese have an economically and militarily modeled every potential outcome in this conflict are sorely mistaken. Very much like the think tank fantasists in London and Washington, who remember the predating on the continuance and perpetuation of this war. The only reason they exist and are getting their stints on the client media, like Sky News retired colonels were never in combat, Eastern European correspondents, like in my country, have never been to Russia. This remarkable industry that's been built up around perpetuating the idea that Ukraine could ever or will ever win this war is reliant on this industry, remember, of a perpetuated war that continues. In Europe, the same people who have now adopted Zelensky as their project, after he was essentially dropped by the Americans when the Biden regime was dispatched, they now know that there's such political capital at stake. People like von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas from Estonia, these yapping, smaller dogs, let's say, who are the most vociferous, deployed by Brussels and London. They, remember, are the whole basis of their stage, much like Zelensky's, is based on the continuance of this war, even if it's a guerrilla war, even if it's a terrorist campaign in Russia. I don't believe that the Russians haven't factored and looked at this. The Russians I speak to still say no deal is better than a bad deal. Who it looks likely to fold first? Even a Russian economy under potential pressure, even a Russian military that would need potentially to draft some more men, potentially, even though it's bringing in hundreds of thousands of volunteers at the moment. No draft, no one's getting dragged off the streets here. Who is more likely, as you said, of this poker game? Who's going to get it over the line? President Trump said it himself this week. He said these are warlike people. And what President Putin has done is very masterful. He's managed this war in a way that it's out of sight, out of mind to some extent, but it's also hit a very much a stride now with the advances on the front line. It's a war of attrition to some extent, but Russian casualties recently have decreased, imagine. The Ukrainians have no men to man this 1,000-kilometer long front line. In a game of time, the Ukrainians are essentially out of time. Look at the Eastern Front in Pokrovsk, as you say, at Dobropilya, this huge incursion, another breakthrough of, maybe 30 kilometers in real terms in the last number of days. They're out of time. The Europeans know that. So I believe there is a sense in Europe of reality dawning. And you heard Merz today coming out, something which would have been unthinkable, that Ukraine is willing to consider territorial concessions, but it has to start with a ceasefire. Believe me, I can tell you something for sure, and yet you can bank this one, George. The Russians will not agree to a ceasefire without a permanent cessation. Absolutely, categorically will not happen. The Russians will not allow the Ukrainians to get off the ropes now. It's either a deal on terms agreed between Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump. And I've said that I don't know why these two men would meet. I don't know why the Russians would meet. I don't know why the American administration would meet. And Dmitry Peskov, the Mr. Putin spokesman at the Kremlin, said, what would be the point of the two presidents meeting if there wasn't something to talk about? I believe that the bones of a deal are already agreed. This is purely my own speculation. And I believe that certain elements will have to be plugged in or pulled out of that on the basis of Europe's and London's input to keep them balanced. But remember, as we saw with tariffs, and we saw when Mr. Trump commanded the Euro-Fuhrer, Ursula von der Leyen, to his golf course in Scotland and commanded Keir Starmer and publicly humiliated the Mayor of London in front of him, they would all fall at the master's feet, wag their tails, because they know Mr. Trump can crush these little dogs and will economically. And if you fall out of favor with the emperor, you're in big trouble. So the final thing I'd say is let's not forget Mr. Trump's personality. He's a big personality, and he wants to be seen as the peace president. He doesn't really care about where the Enigodar line is. He doesn't care about Sumy region. He doesn't care about Kharkov. He doesn't really care about all that stuff. What he cares about is being the man who solved this problem. He wants his Nobel Peace Prize. And if giving some concessions to get that over the line and come out and profess he's the man who's brought peace, he brought rain to the desert, the Messiah, I think that will also influence him. And I think the Russians know that. So it's all to play for, but I wouldn't imagine that the Russians would be flexible on those core issues, because they are now constitutionally enshrined in the Russian constitution. And for President Putin to rescind that or go back on that would be political suicide. And this is a masterful politician and statesman who just is not going to even countenance doing that, George.
But while I've got you, Chay, you were, as a European Union citizen, illegally seized off an airplane in Bucharest and deported from Romania at the height of the scandal of the removal of the runaway winner of the first round of the Romanian presidential elections, Mr. Georgescu, who was removed from the ballot because of Russian interference, Russian funding. Russia had interfered in Romania's internal elections and internal affairs, except Breaking news today, the American investigation into the first round of the Romanian elections has found no evidence at all of Russian interference in Romania. These people lie on such a scale now, Chay. You have to pinch yourself to believe that you're awake in the midst of all of this. What were your thoughts when you saw that news?
Yeah, remarkable. I wasn't surprised, of course, because I knew there had been absolutely zero evidence proffered that this was the case. And remember, when I flew into Bucharest to cover the second round of the election, where George Simeon was widely booted and in the polls as way ahead of the now incumbent leadership of Romania. When I flew in there, it was also revealed that the founder of Telegram had been instructed by the French intelligence services to remove people like me from Telegram, to remove Mr. Simeon and Mr. Georgescu's vast support network off social media. He'd been instructed to do that. That also emerged. We know that the European Union is becoming increasingly authoritarian. We know that there's direct contact between anti-people movements across Europe. The same thing happened with Yevgenia Gutsul in Moldova. The head of the autonomous region of Gagauzia has been sentenced to 7 years in prison in a penal colony. A woman with 2 young children, the elected head of an autonomous region in Moldova, imprisoned with zero evidence. We saw the Russia allegations in the United States, which, of course, the ball has been picked up now by Mr. Trump's administration to pursue Obama and Clinton on this stuff. The problem is, eaten bread is soon forgotten. The Western media, the BBC in particular, whose absolute fantasy I was reading today about the background to the Ukraine war. If you were to ask the BBC, Mr. Poroshenko didn't prosecute an anti-terrorist operation against his own people in 2014 and start to murder them purely for refusing to drop to their knees for a neo-Nazi-aligned regime, which was installed completely illegally. So you got to understand, the more people rise, the more people in France, in Germany, the AfD are now leading the polls in Germany. God knows what will be deployed against them next. The same in Holland, the same in Romania, Moldova. So the EU is very much an empire in decline. And as our wonderful colleague and your guest preceded me, Prof. Wolff, said, this is the time of absolute denial. It's a post-truth reality we live in. And thank God we have platforms like you, like X, for us to talk about this and to try and spread a gospel of truth. You don't have to agree with everything we say. I disagree with many elements of many of my colleagues, but we have to allow and defend our rights to disagree. The right to dissent is the engine of all social justice. We're losing it when it comes to Gaza. Amen. We're losing it when it comes to Ukraine. But yes, though we're losing it, the Israelis, all this time into this war, are now considering an even bigger offensive. More Israelis will die. The hostages may die. In Ukraine, the war is lost, essentially, politically. It's lost militarily. Mr. Zelensky trying to crush the anti-corruption bodies because he's so uncorrupt, of course. So we can see, the people can see, it's undeniable that people can see the pillars of these temples are coming down now, as the learned professor said before me. And it's so important that we continue to push and chip and tell the truth, despite the horrendous threats and treatment we get. All the more reason for us to push forward and seek to introduce a fragment of absolute realism and realization as to what's happening globally now, because this is the most important acute moment for people like you and me to continue our work, to continue shouting as loudly as we can, regardless of what they do to try and silence us.
Amen. They'll never silence us, Chay, not thee and me. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, look, a big shout out to tonight's top donors who've been onto the MOATS.tv website since we came on air. Raymond Papworth, Michael Weinberg, Filio Nicolina, Angela King, and Leon Knight. A big thank you to all of you heroes. And please, they've been generous, but you can leave £1, $1, or €1. It's not asking much, is it? Let's go to Pennsylvania, where Rush wants to talk about Putin and Trump. Go ahead, Rush.
George Galloway, this is the biggest honor of my life, and I'm a 73-year-old man, but your last man there, that you can't follow that one. Now,
thank you, Rush.
The thing, I'd like to get into a little bit of history. I don't know how long I'll have here, but the thing started in 2014. I don't want to name names, blame anybody. It was under Obama. Victoria Nuland overthrew the government over there. We all know that. That's how it started. And then you have Russians in all the different areas there, the bonds, and I don't even know all the names, but they were being mistreated. So Putin's protecting his own people here. Now, I hear. We have a thing here, Fox News. I'm a conservative. I voted for Trump 3 times, but he lost me over this Epstein thing because I've gone too far down a rabbit hole. I don't even want to get into that. Now, they're going to send over this Sean Hannity and Ingram and this Laura Ingram and this and that. You know, I gave up Fox News. I've been following Tucker Carlson for 26 years, and when they fired him, I was done with Fox. I haven't watched it since because he used to have one Colonel Douglas McGregor. I think you may have had him on your show. He's the biggest and best. I'm a Navy veteran, but that guy knows his stuff on what's happening. So and then the Gaza thing, if I may, President Kennedy, I'm 73. I was in 7th grade when he was assassinated. And, you know, I had my own reasonings. They still don't know Lee Harvey Oswald, Degrassi, no. And me and a buddy of mine used to argue, it was the mob because they made Bobby the Attorney General. My big thing was always, I think on your show I might be able to say it, the Mossad was involved here because him and Ben-Gurion did not get along. And at the time, President Kennedy said no nukes to the Middle East, and that included Israel. So he wanted to send in inspectors, and Gurion didn't have nothing to do with it. And he said, well, then we're going to cut off all your funding. Plus the fact that Algeria, I know I run around here a little bit, George, but Algeria became a democratic type state. I don't like to use the word democracy because we're a republic here, but nobody knows it. But Algeria broke away from the French. The French invaded Algeria, killed like 1/3 of the population, and then French Indochina. Well, they ended up with a president. President Kennedy brought the new president over here to the White House. It was the biggest pomp and circumstance ever. And to recognize him, and it was an Arab-speaking nation. And the next day is when it wasn't the Bay of Pigs, but it was the missile crisis or whatever that they threw on Kennedy. And but I still think, because President Kennedy wanted to do a number of things. He wanted to pull out of Vietnam because all we had in there was advisors at the time. He wanted to go back to the silver standard. He wanted to audit the Federal Reserve and no nuclear weapons to the Middle East. And
that's the long and the short of it. And by the way, Rush, that's no longer an isolated or minority opinion that you are expressing. The nuclear question, the question of the Israel lobby having to register as a foreign agents were two mighty motives for Israeli involvement in the greatest of crimes committed inside America in Dallas in 1963. We're running out of time. I've got to remind you that there is the best lineup that I have spoken on for a very long time. It is Friday night. It is No to NATO, One State Palestine, Gaza, What's Next? And my guests, I'll be speaking, my other guests are Yvonne Ridley, the Workers' Party lead candidate in Scotland, Usman Babir Noor, who we hope will be the chief of One State Palestine campaign, one of my best friends, Christopher Helali, who is the foreign affairs spokesman of the American Communist Party, and Rahme Aladwan, live here on my YouTube, Facebook, Rumble and X from 9 p.m. London time on Friday. Be there or be square. Last call, I think. Ryan in Utah on the war. Ryan, what would you like to say?
How you doing, George? Happy birthday. I heard it was your birthday earlier.
Coming up on Saturday, but Ryan, when you get to my age, you're no longer celebrating birthdays, but lamenting them. But thanks very much anyway.
Sure. I hope you have a good day anyway. In your political career, George, all these, repeats of cycles amongst the nations of the world, wars and conflicts and rumours of wars, everything that's happening, is this the worst that you have seen it so far in your life? And if so, where do you see us going from here? Like, do you see any hope? Did something need to happen? Is there going to be something good in the future? Or is this, where do we go from here? Because I feel like people are finally realising that, like you said earlier, everything is a theatre. Everything is, he said, she. It's like your wee cousin in school, or he comes up to you and he's like, oh, by the way, I started a fight with somebody else. That's like Israel and America at the moment. It's like the wee cousin there in the Middle East, and it's like, America's going to back me up. Please help me, please help me. It's like, enough is enough. And I think people have realised, right, something needs to change here in order for some sort of balance to be set, because right now it's chaos. But again, happy birthday. And
it is chaos, and thanks, Ryan. And I have been through multiple crises, some of them as a child. I was very afraid in the Cuban Missile Crisis. You may have heard me say before, the RAF base at Lucas was just minutes flying time from me. I remember having heard my parents talk about the possibility of a world nuclear war, and hearing the jets taking off from Lucas, flying overhead, wondering if this was a plane that was about to drop a nuclear bomb on me. But then I was afraid of dying then. I'm no longer afraid of dying, and have not been for some considerable time. I'm a believer. I believe there's another life, there's another time, there's another dimension, and that what counts in terms of my destination thereafter is what I do in this life. So I don't myself fear death. I don't welcome it, of course, especially because of its impact on people who depend on me, my own children, my own party comrades, and so on. But I don't for myself fear it. But I fear for humanity more now than I have ever done, because we are living in the time of monsters. The old world is dying, but the new world is struggling to be born. And in the resultant morbidities, we are living in a time of monsters, and you don't have to caricature them. I mean, Donald Trump is a monster. In any sane time, we were talking about Jack Kennedy a minute ago, a man of grace and poise and intellect and heroic war record, a man of piety, of faith. Donald Trump is a chief huckster. I mean, he's a Las Vegas huckster. He's like John Voight in Midnight Cowboy, arriving with his cowboy boots and his Stetson in New York, hoping to be a gigolo. That's Donald Trump. That is a manifestation of the time of monsters. So we are in a very dangerous moment when the dying empire has to decide whether to destroy the world rather than accept it's being surpassed by the new rising world, the sun rising in the east. Now, the sensible thing to do, if I were in Wall Street, if I were an American capitalist, if I was an American top brass military officer, would be to accept the dying of the light and to try and get alongside the new world order and see what we could do to mitigate our fall from grace with God. But the truth is, the jury's out on what that outcome is going to be. I'll feel a lot better after Friday. I'll have had my birthday. I'll be back here on Sunday, and we'll have some new facts to analyse, Ryan. It's always wonderful to hear that broad Scottish brogue coming from the state of Utah in the United States of America. But I've got to go because my good wife Gayatri's in the studio with the social media news roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
I read from the uefa.com website that the UEFA Foundation has expanded its support for the humanitarian efforts for children in conflict zones. This is another way of saying that they're adding Gaza to their list of conflict zones that they want to help. Don't know if that's how much of that will be down to mosalah speaking up.
Well, more made an impact.
More made an impact, and therefore the more the reason for all you people in position of influence and power to speak up. Exactly. See what it can do. See what it can do.
But on that, Gayatri, as long as Israel is allowed to participate in UEFA football tournaments, unlike Russia, which was kicked out within a week of the military operation in Ukraine, then all of that's just words. You from Amsterdam know what happens when the Israeli thugs, Maccabee thugs from Tel Aviv, descend on football venues. They're not shy or embarrassed about what their country is doing. They go there to hunt Arabs in the cities they visit.
Exactly, and are being called the victim in that case.
But
I'm just saying that it took them all this time to actually mention Palestine at all. So moving on, because we do not have much time, just very quickly on the poll, will the Trump-Putin Alaska summit end the war in Ukraine? True Britain says this would be a frosty meeting in more ways than one. But if Alaska is where the first steps of towards peace will happen, then history will remember it as a warmer than any summer place.
I very much hope that it does. It's not that I want it to fail, although most of our viewers think it's going to fail. I want it to succeed. I want the war to end. I want the sanctions to be lifted. I want normalcy to slowly seep back into that part of everyone's life. But it's hard to believe that it's going to be solved. However, Trump says, in one of his statements, contradicted by the one after it, but in one of his statements, he says that if the first meeting goes well, the second meeting will follow more or less immediately, and that will be in Crimea, in Yalta, where the victorious powers gathered to decide the future of the world, or certainly the European continent, towards the end of the Second World War. If that's true, again, I welcome the symbolism. It was Roosevelt and Stalin at Yalta, with Mr. Churchill looking increasingly surly and sidetracked, sidelined. But I welcome a summit between Trump and Putin in Yalta and hope that it would have the same kind of outcome. Any more?
Yeah, just this from Sayajal Shajan. He says the US spends $800 billion and more a year on its military. That's more than the next 9 countries combined. Wars fuel industries, end the war suddenly, and parts of the US economy would collapse. Peace isn't just a dream, it's a threat to the business model.
Yeah, although there's other wars they can shift their attentions to, just change the camouflage from European camouflage to desert fatigues.
Is it another distraction for the Epstein time?
That's very good. Well, it is funny, isn't it? Not only is Epstein being wiped off the mainstream political and media map, not the social media alternatives, but Ghislainemaxwell is now on release. She's got work release. She leaves the prison in the morning and goes to work.
Goes to her
I don't know where. A massage parlor, maybe.
Fine, that's fine. Okay, fine. Just last one from Redwood City Buzz. He believes, no, it will not succeed. The UK and the EU will continue arming Ukraine with a pittance of weapons, and more Ukrainians will die so that little Volodymyr can stay in power until Ukraine becomes Afghanistan. That would be quite miserable, wouldn't it, if we would have Afghanistan as an example to it.
Where's Waldo? Where's Volodo? Well, I hope he gets his marching orders this coming weekend. And I kind of think that they are close. We have to go now. Gayatri, the chip shop, will be closed before we get out of this studio. But I think it's been a terrific show with great calls from around the world. We had no British call this evening for the second show in a row, although we did have a Scotsman in Utah. I'm wrong. There was Frida in Cornwall. Surely a spoof caller, surely. It's been marvelous. See you on Sunday.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.